Welcome to Veteran Voices, where we highlight programs and services that support our veterans. I'm your host, Dr. Darin Baskin, and I currently serve as the Executive Director for our Weekend and Honors Colleges. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome to Veterans Voices someone who's going to talk with us about the transition from military to civilian life and how challenging that experience can be. But he has all the information for all the resources to help. James Cabarrus. He is the Community Development Officer with the Harris County Veteran Services Department and serves as the President of the Marine Corps Coordinating Council, Southwest Texas. A big mouthful, just saying that he's a very important person. Welcome to the show, James.
Darin, much appreciate that introduction. Absolutely thrilled and honored and glad to be on here today to share whatever I can to fellow veterans or the family members of veterans as well.
Hey, and let me first start off by saying thank you for your service from a grateful nation.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So let's just jump into it. Before I even jump into my questions, let me just say, I served in the military also myself, and people think that we have this rivalry going on between the different service, the branches. So let me just say right from the beginning, before we even start our conversations, that the Army does all the work, and then I'll just leave it at that. Okay.
Very well. Coming from a background of a guy with just tons of military in the family, the predominant service of my family is Army. So this feels like a whole Thanksgiving table conversation right here because I hear this a lot. They're wrong, but I hear it a lot.
You're wrong, but it is a good conversation to have. Oh my God, very good. So let's just jump into it. What are some of the factors that make a successful transition from active duty service? Because we know that there are a lot of social barriers that take place and the conditioning that soldiers go through to join the military.
You're absolutely right, Darin. There is just a litany of things to do, when coming into the service, and you're taught how to walk, how to talk. Your haircut's the same, your uniform's the same, but sometimes leaving out, there isn't as much attention and effort put into that. But growing up, my grandfather was one of my idols, and he always told me that there was nothing new underneath the sun. And I've kind of taken that advice and kind of harnessed it and applied it to all areas of my life. So here's what I believe. I believe that there were a lot of folks that came before me that transitioned really well, and there were also a lot of people that came before me that had some struggles and hiccups during that transition. One of the effective practices that I used were to reach out to all those people. I want to hear about the good, the bad, and the ugly, as it came to veterans transitioning. And then I kind of cherry picked. I found out, some of the hiccups and roadblocks that people ran into, and I would kind of formulate and design a plan to keep me from, hitting that same roadblock or that hiccup. So I think one, first and foremost, just getting out there and having conversations with folks that have done it before you, and even the ones that did it correctly and successfully. Like, what did you do? What did you implement into your plan as you transition? So that's one of the tricks that I use, just having conversations with people who already traveled that road.
And I think you've hit the nail on the head, because I think one of the biggest resources out there is other veterans who have transitioned out successfully from the military to civilian life. Because I think you made an extremely valid point. The conditioning that goes into a soldier, we're providing them everything that they need. You provide them every resource. Every detail of everything that they do is given to them. And then you come out of the military where nothing is structured that way. And now you have all of this free thinking, this availability to make your own decisions could definitely be overwhelming. And so I think having that person to help you transition over, I think is an amazing, useful tool. So I think you hit that right on point. And as we know, the military is very famous for all the jargon and all of the acronyms that we have. And the difference is military personnel understands them, civilians do not. So how can veterans tell their story to people not associated with the military while they're dealing with that?
So I thought that I had this area down pat. I had been practicing it. I thought I knew everything was good. And my first job out of the military was with Comcast. And so I traveled to their vet net up in Pennsylvania. I had a really great time, but it's about lunchtime at this point. And I looked over to my boss and I said, "Hey, I'm about to go grab some chow." And he just kind of froze in place and was like, "Chow?" And I was like, "Oh, lunch." So what I would advise veterans to do is find somebody who is not affiliated. Oh, hold on 1 second, y'all. I got my motion light here at work, and if I don't move, it cuts off. Sorry about that. But find some veterans or find some people that aren't affiliated with the military that don't understand the jargon, and then just simply tell them a story. And then at the end of that, have them repeat that story back to you. Now, if they're extremely confused and don't understand some of the words that you use, then there's a good chance that there needs to be some revamping, if you will, of that language that we're used to using in the military. But so that's kind of how I tackle that. I would have stories and conversations with people, and they would say, "Hey, James, what's chow or what do you mean you need some R&R?" I'm like, "Oh, y'all call that PTO on this side of the house." Okay, I got it, I understand. And I think just the more we practice that, the better we get at it.
I think you're right on point. And I'm enjoying this conversation so much, James. I'm going to bring you back. We're going to take a short break, but when we return, we'll have more with James.
At HCC, your dreams are within reach.
When I grow up, I want to work at the hospital. When I grow up, I want to work in a lab to build robots.
When I grow up, I want to work at a school and be a teacher.
From classroom to career, we're with you every step. Register for real-world education at hccs.edu.
How prepared is your family if disaster shows up at your doorstep? You can't just turn away a natural disaster. That's why it's important to go to ready.gov/plan before they show up. It has the tools and tips you need to make an emergency plan with your family. So if disaster comes knocking,
Let's go.
you'll be ready to help keep your family safe.
It's just a pizza.
Yes!
Make a plan today.
Welcome back to Veterans Voices, where we are continuing our conversation with James Cabarrus about transitioning from active duty military to civilian life. And some of the points that you heard earlier were just right, spot on as it relates to the jargon or the terminology. It is a learning curve. And so we have to understand that after transitioning out of the military, there's going to be another learning curve for learning new terminology, new jargon. So thank you for that that explanation, James. I think you're right on point with that. And so now let's talk about some of my favorite things to talk about, the resources, some of the resources that are out there for this transition. James, give us some of your favorite resources that helps with the process of transitioning.
So probably my top one is where I work now, the Harris County Veteran Services Department. We like to say that we're a great place to start, right? Like we don't think we're the end all be all, but we definitely have services that can lead veterans in the right direction. A whole host of resources. I mean, if you're in Houston and you're a veteran, like there are more resources than you can even throw a stick at. So I will start there. Another really good one is called 4Block. 4Block is a national organization. It's a nonprofit, and they have 2 cohorts a year. And these cohorts go through things like LinkedIn pages, how to make those look professional, resumes, triangulating your career, finding your purpose, all the things that we kind of need to revamp once we get outside of the military, because now we have a new purpose and a new mission in life. So my top two would be the Harris County Veteran Services Department and then 4Block.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. And I've done some really good research on veteran services because I have a lot of my colleagues that work for the VA and work for the city of Houston in services that provide psychological services. And so I've done a lot of research, so I know both of those areas that you're referring to. I do think that Harris County does an amazing job at trying to put resources in place for veterans. So you and your team over there at Harris County, you guys do an amazing job with that. So good job. And let's jump into this. How do you build a solid inner support circle?
So I think that when you come to a new area, the word that sticks out to me is two words: deliberate and intentional. Right? Like the easiest thing to do would be for the veteran to leave service, come home, lock their door, never conversate, never communicate with anyone, and just kind of be in a shell. However, when we unlock that door and we actually step out and we look at these resources and we attend these networking events, we're going to meet like-minded people. We're going to meet other folks that have served just the same manner that we serve. And when we do that, now we open ourselves up to even more resources, to more stories. And a lot of those things are applicable across multiple industries and domains. So I would say start there. Just be deliberate and intentional about finding that sense of camaraderie outside of the military.
And I think you're again spot on, because it leads into the last question I was going to ask you, which was, why is it important to find purpose outside of the military? And I think you've started that whole conversation. I think we do tend to want to isolate ourselves when it's difficult for us to adjust to something that is different. And so I think finding a purpose, finding a reason to be in civilian life, I think is very impactful to the adjustment period.
Absolutely. I think you're spot on, Darin. I've always seen purpose as kind of the driving force behind us, right? So if I'm in my truck, like my purpose is my engine. If I lose that, now I kind of lose my ability to focus and navigate. So having a purpose, having a mission in front of me, and understanding what that is, why I exist, why am I on the earth? What is James meant to do in Houston? And what's the impact that I'm designed to make? When we understand that, it's easy to kind of map out, where we're going next. When we don't understand that, we can seem like, just kind of lost and wandering around. So I would encourage everybody, find out why you exist, why you were born. Everybody, I believe, has a purpose. And once we figure out what that is, life gets a little bit easier.
Yeah. And a lot of times that purpose might come in something that you would have never thought of. And so taking these assessments, taking these career assessments, these personality assessments, these individualized assessments will also help.
Absolutely. I think 100%, spot on advice, whether we're talking about everything DISC or any of the many assessments that are out there, because like you said, a lot of veterans transition. It's like, I'm not really good at anything except the military, but they'll do an assessment and they'll figure out, like, you know what, I'm actually pretty good at a whole bunch of other things over here. I just never knew it because I was never exposed to it. So I like that.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly, 100%. So James, it has been my pleasure to have this conversation with you, a necessary conversation, and a conversation that is so informative that I am going to share this on my social media just so we can make sure we get this word out. And before I let you go, let me just go ahead and say, go ahead and pencil me in for that Thanksgiving dinner so we can go ahead and distill this idea that you have about the Army being the workhorse of the military branches, and we can talk about it over turkey. Okay.
Hey, you had me at turkey. Absolutely love it. Darin, I thank you for having me on as a guest. I appreciate it. And I too have enjoyed the conversation.
Hey, we're going to have many, many more. I know we are. So thank you again. And after the break, we explore resources for individuals and families impacted by domestic and sexual violence.
At HCC, your dreams are within reach.
When I grow up, I want to work at the hospital. When I grow up, I want to work in a lab to build robots.
When I grow up, I want to work at a school and be a teacher.
From classroom to career, we're with you every step. Register for real-world education at hccs.edu.
Did you know it's kitten season? Right now, thousands of kittens are in shelters across the nation, and they're in need of love and care. If you foster a kitten, you'll be giving them the chance to grow up and find families of their very own. Visit bestfriends.org/kittens.
Welcome back to the Veterans Voice. Domestic and sexual violence impacts many families in our areas. The Bay Area Turning Point provides services and advocacy to those families to reach safety and to build a new life. We are honored to have with us Melissa Prentice, who is the Outreach, Education, and Preventative Director, to tell us more about the Bay Area Turning Point and the services they provide. Melissa, thank you for joining us at the show on such a serious topic, but a necessary topic.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, so if we are just jumping into it, let me first ask you, did you serve or do you have family members who have served?
I have several family members who have served.
Well,
I have not, but
well, you have served, because if you understand the military, the family serves along with the soldier.
Mm-hmm.
So please understand that. So thank you for the service that you provided also. So let's talk about this. Okay. How prevalent is domestic and sexual violence, and what is the impact it has on veterans?
Well, domestic and sexual violence are very widespread. You're looking at, for a general population, about 1 in 3 women and about 1 in 4 men are experiencing intimate partner violence every year. Amongst veterans, we're looking at a percentage between 15 and 60% of domestic violence happening between couples. About 1 in 3 domestic violence victims that are veterans are female. We have men that are also victims of domestic violence. You're looking at about 1 in 50, but again, that's just reported. So that number could be much higher, but amongst the reported, about 40% of domestic violence cases that have come from veterans are from men. So we're seeing this on both sides. And I'm sorry, that wasn't domestic violence, that was sexual violence. So about 1 in 3 women, 1 in 50 men are the ones reporting this. What we're seeing, like the impacts that we're seeing is that reintegration back into the family life, kind of like James was talking about prior. That's a very difficult and challenging time for veterans or for military members that are coming back from active duty, that are coming back from combat. And a lot of times they are trained to use violence in order to protect this country, right? During wartime, they're using violence. And so whenever they're trying to integrate back into family life, that can create some problems. And what we're seeing is military sexual trauma especially has very common similarities to childhood trauma. So we see the physical abuse, we see the sexual abuse. And whenever you have experienced trauma, any kind of traumatic event as a child, it takes a lot of time to heal from that. And so we see veterans having difficulty with relationships. We see them having difficulty with social functioning. We see them feeling a lack of safety whenever they come home. We see them experiencing disturbing memories or nightmares. And the problem is, a lot of times whenever veterans are coming back, or military members are coming back from combat, they're already suffering from that traumatic brain injury. They're already suffering from PTSD. Now you have the trauma of domestic violence or sexual assault on top of that. So I can speak from survivorship of general population. I have been through domestic violence and sexual assault. That is traumatic. It's very traumatic. Now add in the trauma from being at war, from being overseas, from being active duty. And so that can really cause some issues.
Yeah, and thank you. And also thank you for sharing your experiences. You know, it comes to a point where when you're able to share that, that's part of the healing process. And so thank you for sharing that. And I think you've made some extremely valid points. I think the point that you made about the type of protective nature that military have to protect the country, to protect and serve the country, then carries over into their relationships. And also, I think you really answered and capitalized on the questions I was going to ask you next, which was like, what are some of the intersections of both domestic violence and sexual assault as it relates to the military? And I think you hit those spot on. I really think that the idea that's posted behind the military sexual violence has, I mean, just shining a light on that in the past few years, you do see the similarities between early childhood trauma and the trauma that is experienced through the military. So again, thank you for sharing that. So let me ask you this though. What are some of those effective preventative approaches that we can take to both domestic and sexual violence, either military or even in civilian life?
Yeah, and so there's a lot of prevention measures that you can take. Something else to kind of keep in mind whenever we're especially talking about intersections, especially female veterans, if they experience intimate partner violence, they are at higher risk of also experiencing housing instability, economic instability, and homelessness. And so these are things that a lot of people don't really put together, but the economic stability, the housing stability, that all goes hand in hand with experiencing domestic and sexual violence. And we already see a lot of veterans struggling with housing instability already and economic stability whenever they are returning from active duty. And so again, you're at a heightened risk there. Some of the prevention methods that we try to talk about, of course, we need to have more support systems in place, especially with those economic opportunities, with those housing opportunities. And we also really need to see more mental health services. As the general population, we need to understand that this is not an overnight process, healing from this. And so veterans need to be okay with understanding too, that it's not going to be an overnight process, healing from domestic and sexual violence. This takes time. So it's important to think about, if you've employed any strategies in the past, what's worked? Do you have coping mechanisms for dealing with those very strong emotions like anger? Anger is a very normal emotion, but it's a very strong emotion that everybody feels at one point or another. And a lot of times whenever we're thinking about anger, we associate that with violence. And being trained to use violence already kind of escalates that risk of experiencing or even perpetrating domestic or sexual violence. Connection is really key. Really connecting with your community, whether that be the veteran community or the community that you live in, some form of community, some sense of community. That is one of the biggest protective factors whenever we're talking about domestic and sexual violence prevention. You want to limit your exposure to media, because that's all we're hearing in the media is bad stuff, right? We're always hearing things that are going to remind us of those traumatic events that we've been through. While it's important to kind of stay on top of what's going on, still don't focus so much on all that media. And then I cannot stress enough, peer support groups, counseling services, therapy. There are several places that will provide counseling, therapy, either free of charge on a sliding scale. If you have insurance, that helps. The VA provides a lot of these services. We also provide free counseling services for people that are dealing with domestic and sexual violence trauma. But I know in my own experience, therapy has been the one thing that's really helped me out a lot. A friend of mine, actually down here in the area that we live in, he is a Marine veteran, and he actually runs a support group for veterans that are transitioning back into civilian life. So just seeking out those kind of groups, right? And then also, and this is something a lot of people don't think about, but emotional support animals, the ones that are actually very highly trained to be able to sense what's going on with you, those can really, really help out a lot. The emotional support animals. And then just finding that assistance on reintegration back to civilian life.
Wow. And let me just say, the point you're making, the way you are telling the story and you're weaving together the preventative services, the intersectionalities, and the relationship between the military and the domestic and the sexual violence, it shows that with the right help and with the right program, you can actually be able to at least get to a place of understanding. So I appreciate all the work that you guys do. Let me say that, give us a quick overview of what Bay Area Turning Point Services do. You have about, let's say, a minute.
Okay, I got to do the minute version. So I'm very long-winded if you can't tell. So we do have a 24-hour hotline. This operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Anybody that is experiencing crisis can call that. We do have accompaniment services. So if anybody is in the hospital or at a police station due to domestic or sexual violence, we have advocates on call 24 hours that can meet them there for support. We have our victim advocates who can accompany victims to court if they are going through the court system or they need a protective order. We do have those free counseling services. We do individual and group counseling. We do have rental assistance for those that have experienced domestic and sexual violence. And we do have our 24-hour shelter. It is a residential facility. It houses up to 72 men, women, and children. And we also have our outreach, education, and prevention services, which is what I am over. We will educate on anything domestic sexual violence related. If we're not already experts in it, we will become an expert in it, just to make sure that people are educated on these issues.
I love it. And long-winded and all, your information is spot on and very, very necessary. So it has been my pleasure, Melissa, to talk to you. Thank you again for discussing this extremely difficult topic, but approaching it from a scientific and pragmatic approach to be able to assist. I appreciate you. Thank you. If you'd like more information on any of the organizations and services you've seen on the program today, visit our website at hccs.edu/VeteransVoices. To listen to a podcast portion of this show, visit hccs.edu/podcast. For everyone here at HCC TV, thank you for joining us on Veterans Voices.